Hello, everybody. You are listening to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I am happy that you are joining me for the broadcast, or podcast, as the kids are calling it. This week, I wanted to talk a little bit about, the kind of tremendous things that are happening around us. I wanted to take, just a second to point out a couple things. This past Sunday, was a climate change march that brought, supposedly about 300,000 people onto the streets of New York City to bring attention to the kind of desperate need for some sort of structural shift in the way we do business globally, lest we kill the planet quicker than we all imagine. I think that's really historically important, obviously, but at the same time, I'm a little cynical about the speed at which these things take place and the efficacy of large-scale marches at all. In either case, I think it was really important, and the reason I call attention to it is because, I studied the Vietnam War, and particularly the movement to end the Vietnam War, which was effective and is historically important. I don't think anyone denies that. At the same time, the effects of these marches and the effects of this kind of protest activity are often unpredictable. You're not sure where. Politics are really tricky. And in that, to that end, I'm specifically referring to the fact that there were 600,000 people in Washington D.C. in November 1969 as part of a national protest against the Vietnam War after Nixon took over. But in the ensuing 6 years before the United States finally left Vietnam, 26,000 American soldiers were killed. And even more, horrific than that are the hundreds of thousands of Cambodians and Laotians and Vietnamese people who were killed or injured, or left a degraded landscape in that war. So in other words, I guess I'm kind of wary of the desire for really quick, gigantic, revolutionary structural change. These things seems like history is like a cruise ship that needs to be turned slowly. And so I guess I'm holding out hope for this being a moment to really make the shift towards a cleaner way of doing business on the planet, but I'm not sure how that will go down, particularly how embedded these giant structures are. That being said, Shama Sawant, who has come up a few times on this program, she's the city council member in Seattle, who's one of the first socialists to be elected in decades to a major city position like that. She was suggesting, and she's part of the team that's includes Naomi Klein, whose new book is called This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. They are both kind of suggesting that the United States nationalize its energy industries, in particular electric and oil companies, which sounds so I think insane to most Americans who are bred on kind of a Fox News or even MSNBC kind of viewpoint of the free market and how the market does things so much better than the government. That's the lie that we're supposed to believe. But it is a lie, and I'm currently teaching a course about the history of the Great Depression and New Deal. And, we look at this, we looked at the Tennessee Valley Authority, and everyone agrees that the TVA, which delivered electric power to areas of the country that had never had it before or had very scant electrical power, delivered it better than private companies ever did. And in fact, private companies got in the way of the government even doing that. The history of that is really, really important. And it demonstrates that, in terms of basic utilities, at least in that case, the government delivered the goods in a way that capitalism never, ever could. And in fact, the main statistic that sticks out to all of us is the fact that in the places where people did have electricity, once the Tennessee Valley Authority began building its infrastructure, the electric bills for the average consumer were cut in half. As opposed, so in other words, the private companies were charging double what the government did, and the grid was much larger and inspired projects all across the country. Of course, we don't have a Tennessee Valley Authority anymore. But Shama Sawant and Naomi Klein and other voices are kind of coalescing around that as a major issue, and that's the kind of stuff I like to see, as opposed to a kind of Um, I guess a movement that doesn't have a particular demand. That sounds like a demand that's something that people could get behind, particularly if they knew the history of things like the Tennessee Valley Authority and how the government is able to deliver things much better than capitalism ever could. So, with that being said, I have a guest today who has spent her lifetime and a long career, a long, amazing career, talking about American politics, and not only talking about American politics, but trying to shift American politics. Her name is Professor Frances Fox Piven. She's well known as a professor of political science and sociology at the CUNY Graduate Center, where she's been since the early 80s. She is known for a lot of things, but in particular, a 1966 article in The Nation that created a strategy for kind of challenging the welfare infrastructure and attempting to, create a kind of revolutionary crisis about poverty in the United States. It's still, I think, an article and a set of ideas that the left and the right, in different ways, obviously, are still reckoning with. And I think that's important and speaks to how profound the ideas are. So I had a great conversation with her. We only had about 45 minutes to talk. So this is a slightly shorter episode, but we got some great stuff out. And, Professor Piven shared with me at the end of this episode, we got to talk a little bit about her experience becoming the target of Glenn Beck on Fox News and beyond, and how the right wing mobilized against her in incredibly terrifying ways. And she says something that you should pay attention to at the very end of this interview that just was stunning to me about the right wing and about the nature of right thinking in the United States. And it was stunning and terrifying, and it was a great way to end the program. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and you find more Nostalgia Trap. These conversations are sometimes featured on jacobinmag.com. You can like the Facebook page for updates on new episodes. Stitcher.com for an app that you can download to get new episodes. And all of the episodes are on the blog at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. So again, I hope you enjoy this conversation and join me again. This is me and Professor Frances Fox Piven. Different people that I've talked to on this show a lot of them have been baby boomers, people that were born right after World War II, and that kind of defined their political experience in a sense. But you were not born during that time, and you were born right square at the beginning of the Great Depression. How much did the Great Depression and growing up during that era weigh on you? How much was that a formative part of your experience?
I think it was formative because it was so formative for my parents. My parents were Belarusian Jewish immigrants. They had been living in Calgary. That's where I was, Calgary, Canada. That's where I was born. And things were bad. They couldn't earn a living. And when I was about 8 or 10 months old, they made their way to New York. They had some family in New York, and they were searching for a way just to earn a living.
Yeah.
And so when we came here, my father was out of work for a while. I remember, going up the street to the bus stop to wait for him because he would go every day looking for work.
What had he been doing?
He was a small storekeeper. I think in Canada he did different things. He worked as a salesman for a film company, for Kodak maybe.
Right.
And he used to tell me about trying to sell film to farmers in Saskatchewan during the Great Depression. He said, these farmers had just sent their animals to market and gotten back a bill for the part of their transportation costs that the sale didn't cover. And here he was trying to get them to buy film. Yeah. That was one job he had. I think he worked for a relative for a while. they were. They had very little formal education, my parents, and here in this country, he for many years, about I guess 10 years, he opened one tiny little delicatessen after another that failed.
Right. And this was all in Canada?
No, after he got to the United States.
To the U.S., okay.
Yeah, that's what he did in the United States. I remember he borrowed $500 from my aunt, who was a seamstress, and to rent the store where you open the delicatessen.
It's incredible, $500 to rent a delicatessen.
To get the fixtures.
Yeah, right.
To make it into a delicatessen. And
so he's entrepreneurial in some sense.
Yeah, so that $500 debt weighed on family relations for a long time.
I'm sure.
And he did pay it back, I think. Anyway, so I grew up in an apartment in Jackson Heights. I had an older brother and a sister, younger sister, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my father every day went to open the store at the crack of dawn, stayed there till well after midnight.
Was the store in Queens?
Well, the first one was in Queens, on 90th Street and 37th Avenue, I think. We lived on 88th and 31st Avenue. But then there was another store in Midtown Manhattan. After the first one failed, and he spent a long time unemployed, I don't know exactly how long, then he opened the other store in I think 53rd Street and 7th Avenue, probably very high-priced real estate right now.
Yeah,
but
seriously.
This was deep into the Depression.
Yeah.
So,
what about the politics of the Great Depression? I mean, I know you were young during that era, but do you recall kind of that what was going on with FDR and World War II and all that stuff?
I don't recall that. I recall only my parents. I mean, I was less than a year old when we came here, and until. I mean, I didn't know anything about the great labor struggles or anything like that.
Right.
Not at all. But I knew certain things from my father. My father would say that it's a dog-eat-dog society. And there's a story I've told a couple of times lately, but I'm going to tell it again because I like it so much. I remember I didn't see my father very often because of this horrendous small storekeeper schedule.
Right.
But when I saw him, he was usually reading the newspaper. And he told me, when he talked to me about politics, even though I was only maybe 3 or 4 years old. He talked to me about politics. So he said you couldn't believe the capitalist press. And it was full of lies. I said, why do you read the newspaper, Daddy? He said, I read between the lines, which I then tried to do.
He's introducing the concept of critical inquiry to a very young child.
I tried to do it for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think there was a kind of politics in this family socialization.
It sounds like it a little bit.
And you know, my brother brought home records of the Spanish Civil War and Paul Robeson, things like that. And I think that I went to the University of Chicago when I was 15.
That's right.
And I think that by that time, Henry Wallace was running. And that was my candidate for president. I remember also, by the way, that on my street, Jackson Heights, an immigrant street, Italians, Irish, Eastern European Jews, mainly Italians and Irish, though.
Right.
The street was just overcome with grief when FDR died.
Oh, I'm sure. I've heard of that kind of like
Incredible.
outburst.
Incredible.
Yeah. And that had an effect on you? Is that something that you obviously recall?
I recall it,
Yeah.
but I don't know that. I mean, FDR had been there forever.
Yeah.
He had been there.
Right.
So, I mean, I didn't.
For a lot of Americans, he was the only president they could remember.
Yeah. Well, he was certainly the only one I could remember, and no.
How did it come that you got to the University of Chicago at 15 years old?
Well, the University of Chicago had a program where they admitted sophomores, high school sophomores, if they passed their exams. And, I mean, of course, I didn't know about that. My family didn't know about that. But my brother was a PhD student at the University of Chicago. And he came home and persuaded my father to let me take the exam. And my father said, okay, she gets a scholarship. She can go. So that's how I got there.
And you ended up being there for quite a while.
Yeah.
And you got your PhD there, is that right?
Yeah, I got my PhD there, but I wasn't there at that time. I left Chicago. I got married there. I got an MA there. And I got an MA in planning. And, you know, I thought of it as kind of social and economic planning.
Yeah. And
reshaping the world.
And what was the historical context of that for you? I mean, this is the 1950s, is that right?
Yeah.
That this is going on. So where are you politically during that era? And I just mean, you know, when I think of the 50s, I think of the Cold War, I think of McCarthyism.
We formed a student political party at the University of Chicago. I mean, it's like we didn't know that the country was turning to the right. But in 1953, we formed a new political party. It was going to be a big left-wing student party. And I was on the ticket. And but I had the good sense to campaign. By this time, I had just entered graduate school. So I campaigned just by going up to everybody and saying, will you vote for me? And
like a high school president thing.
Right,
yeah.
right. That's how I campaigned. And I stood in the social science hallway, and I just asked everybody to vote for me. And I got the highest number of votes that had ever been scored by a student government candidate. And my friends thought that it was a sign that the left was reemerging.
What were your issues? Do you remember at all?
No issues. Well, the party, we as a group had issues, but I didn't campaign on those issues.
You just
I
said, vote for
by
me.
just saying, please vote for me.
Yeah.
And I don't exactly remember our issues, but they had to do with stuff that was going on in the state capital, Springfield, that was already tainted by the McCarthy period.
Right.
I'd have to do some digging to remember specifically what the issues were. But we were determined to fight all that, and we were sure we could because we had scored so big in these student government elections.
Well, you know, as we get to, you know, the 1960s, you know, there is, you know, that the article in The Nation that you're most known for, in a sense, from that era at least. That, you know, that was 66, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Did that strategy emerge from frustration with the war on poverty and the progress of the Johnson administration?
No, I was also always frustrated by the war on poverty. And, you know, I thought about it, the kinds of things a lot of left-wing critics said then and still say it was co-optive and so forth, although looking back on it now, I think the war on poverty was an achievement. Not because I was wrong about the co-optation, I think winning things. Why do you win things? You win things because they want to co-opt you, because you're making enough trouble to make it necessary for them to quiet you.
They have to deal with that political energy somehow.
Yeah. So that article came from our experience at Mobilization for Youth. We were working on the Lower East Side, and the Mobilization for Youth was a very sort of inspirational early poverty program. Everybody was so excited. It attracted a lot of lefties. And then it was attacked in the daily news day after day, full-page articles, headlines, front-page headlines. And it was attacked by the city government. It was attacked, it wasn't attacked, but all the federal agencies that had funded it were demanding the records, scrutinizing the records. The state legislature wanted the records.
What was the program ostensibly set up for? Was it a jobs program?
No, it was it was a program to deal with juvenile delinquency originally.
Okay. Yeah.
But the way to deal with juvenile delinquency was to enlarge economic and educational opportunities in the neighborhood.
Right.
And that expanded to including organizing the neighborhood and giving the kids space to organize.
It seems so amazing that would be. Is this a federal program?
No, the problem was that it did have lefties on the staff, only about 3 or 4 out of hundreds, but they were there. And at that time, the first riots of the 1960s occurred in New York City, and they were said to have been sparked by a flyer that was being distributed in poor communities that said, "Wanted for murder, Gilligan the cop," because a cop named Gilligan had killed a 14-year-old boy. And that did seem to be one of the triggers. Yeah. But it's only a trigger, right?
Right. It's just like what's going on in Ferguson right now. It's
they
easy to distort that.
They accused us, especially the Daily News, but also the police department. They accused Mobilization for Youth of having mimeographed, in those days, mimeograph machines?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Mimeographed.
I'm well familiar with how important the mimeograph machine was at that point.
The flyers. And because we were the kind of program that made storefront offices available to kids, gangs, and mimeograph machines, we didn't know. It took months before we were able to get expert testimony to the effect that it wasn't our machine that had mimeographed the flyers.
Oh, wow.
And in those months, all the investigations went on.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that Mobilization did was it opened storefront service centers on the Lower East Side. For no reason anybody could understand, excepting that it was a sort of coalition of different do-gooding professionals, and some of them were social workers. And what did they do? What was their contribution going to be? They didn't do job training. They didn't do this or that. So they could provide services to people in these storefronts. So there were wooden desks in the storefronts, and people came for help with problems.
Right.
Now, surprise, surprise. So the Ford Foundation was also involved when the attacks started because they were giving us money. So the Ford Foundation demanded to know, they demanded an evaluation of this mystery program, the Storefront Service Center. We had 3 of them. And so Richard and I, we distributed little cards to the social workers sitting at the wooden desks that said, what was the problem? What did you do? You know? What are you doing here? And we found the cards came back, and the problems were that they were being evicted, that they didn't have money for school clothing or for shoes. And what did the social worker do? Help them get on welfare. Well, collected all the cards. We wrote the little report for the Ford Foundation about this and other of our programs.
Right.
But then we wondered, how come there's so many people on the Lower East Side who are eligible for welfare but are not getting it?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started looking at other surveys. These were mainly surveys done preparatory to urban renewal programs, surveys of particular areas in New York City, and then we went to surveys in other cities, and these surveys had data on family income, family structure, and whether people were on welfare.
Mm.
And so we made sort of seat-of-the-pants calculations about welfare coverage and decided that welfare was providing assistance to about a third of the people who were eligible.
Wow.
When we wrote the article, we said we think, let's be safe. Let's say half the people.
Okay, yeah.
You know? And that article was based on that fact that welfare was operating, we said, illegally.
Yeah.
It was not providing information to people. And we had, by that time, data also showing that they were sending people who applied for welfare back home to South Carolina.
Mm.
They were giving them bus tickets instead of welfare checks.
Mm. So the government had a stake in kind of not only robbing people of the information that they need in advertising these programs, but also actively, it sounds like, blocking people from getting these benefits.
Of course.
Yeah. So that it seems like your strategies as an activist and maybe as an academic too, they're not in the street with a picket sign. It seems like you've come up with strategies, ideas that are about kind of gaming the system or finding ways to hit the system and make a move. Where did that philosophy come from for you? Because there were so many different forms of activism that took place during the 60s, but it seems like yours were very focused on kind of demanding things from the system. Where did you develop that strategy, if you can remember? Do you feel like that came from a certain place, or?
I'm not sure.
Because I think of you as standing in the hallway asking for votes is a pretty simple political strategy, but by the time we get to the mid-60s...
Well, that's pretty strategic too, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess
that's pretty strategic. I mean, I was a pretty girl asking for votes and not mentioning the politics of the situation.
Right.
I don't know if I had thought that all through, but that's what I did. Mm. It wasn't Machiavellian. Mm. It wasn't. It had more to do with knowing something about these women and their families and their lives, and being a little impatient about a politics that was only symbolic and declarative.
Mm-hmm. I know what you mean, and it seems like as the 60s progressed, there's a kind of a confluence of all these issues where all of a sudden you have kind of everything exploding in 1968. Was that something that took hindsight, or how much were you aware that capitalism was kind of in this kind of chaotic moment during this era with Vietnam and civil rights and everything else?
I thought it was a chaotic moment, but I didn't think capitalism was collapsing.
Mm-hmm. Capitalism was doing pretty well throughout the 1960s, actually.
Still is.
Yeah.
So, and the idea that you could actually think, identify vulnerabilities, strategize to take advantage of those vulnerabilities by mobilizing the people who were in a position to act on those vulnerabilities. That approach. It's not an idea, it's an approach.
Right.
That approach is based on the assumption that the system may be bending in the wind, but it's not toppling. And therefore, it can give.
Yeah.
And it did give.
Yeah. I mean, it's something we're still coming to terms with, I think. And it's something that I'd say the nostalgia trap is the title of this show, partially because the 1960s tend to be a nostalgia trap for the left, in a sense that there's this kind of weird coming to terms with that era in one way or another. And some people kind of regard it as a failure, others regard it as the greatest victory. But either way, it feels like this kind of golden moment that's romanticized. And the real victories and the real work that emerged out are still very much in front of us. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience at Boston University, because I know you had you were there with Howard Zinn.
Right.
And how close were you with Howard Zinn during that era?
He was a very good friend.
Uh-huh. And
we had adjacent offices.
Okay.
So whenever we were in school, we saw each other, and we had lunch, and we hung out, and we laughed a lot.
Yeah.
And we spent time in the evening on weekends too. And I was friends with his wife Roz. But I mean, Howard made Boston University a wonderful place for me, because it was so much fun to go to school and hang out with him. And I had students, but he really had students. They were always lined up in the hall, sitting on the floor, waiting for him.
It's funny because, obviously, I come to Howard Zinn from People's History of the United States being a kind of like signal book for young people. I think still, I still teach that book in my history classes over at Brook, because I feel like young business students especially should read, at least be aware of this perspective of U.S. history. But it sounds like he was a popular lecturer too.
Yeah, he was. His classes were very large, and John Silber, the president of Boston University, he was a little bit crazy, but certainly a right-winger. But crazy, and what made him craziest was Howard Zinn. And what the administration used to do, they used to assign him small classrooms.
Wow.
Because he had 250 students in his class.
Yeah.
So.
Did you you got involved in a fight with Boston University a little bit? Is that right, with Howard Zinn over, was it labor issues?
No, what happened was, in a way, it was over labor issues. The faculty went on strike, and at the same time, the clerical workers went on strike.
Right.
The administration signed with the faculty, but not with the clerical workers. So there were about 30 faculty people who did not go back to their classes. I was one of them. Howard was one of them. And Murray Levin was one. And the administration took advantage of a clause in the contract that the faculty had signed, which I think allowed them to suspend the faculty who had not come back, who had not crossed the clerical workers' picket line.
Right.
So, but Silber didn't suspend me. He suspended Howard. And Murray. He suspended 5 people. So I... Can you...
Yeah, we'll pause it.
Hello? Oh.
When Howard Zinn was suspended?
Yeah, I was trying to organize a faculty vote demanding that Silber resign. And we got a lot of votes. I think we got 800 votes. It was a lot of work to organize that.
It's happening right now with the professor at the University of Illinois over they didn't hire him over his tweets about Palestine. I don't know if you've followed that a little bit, but it sounds similar in the sense that you have faculty that are kind of trying to put pressure on the administration to change their decision, and now we have boards of trustees and it's kind of like even larger institutional structures.
Well, we had a board of trustees too.
I
We
can
weren't
imagine.
even thinking about that. Anyway, so what the board of trustees did after that was they summoned about 6 or 8 of us to appear before the board of trustees. And they harangued us. I mean, that was sort of a star chamber trial.
Right.
And it was ridiculous. Childish dramatics. And about, I guess it was a couple years later, I was supposed to go to the University of Amsterdam for a while, and Silber denied me leave. And then I got a scholarship, a fellowship from the American Council of Learned Societies, which I applied for because Silber had sent around a directive saying it would be an honor to the university if you would get this. So I applied for it, and I got it. And I wanted to use it to go to the University of Amsterdam or something like that. So anyway, I finally quit. And I said I was being harassed. I told the Boston Globe that I quit because I was being harassed. And Silber told the Boston Globe that I quit to be with my consort, lover, whatever, in New York, which also was true. Anyway.
We're sitting here talking on, and I didn't plan it this way, but we're talking on the anniversary of September 11, 2001, a moment that I think of as a moment where politics took some sort of turn in American life, maybe not as significant a turn as we thought. But in either case, I feel like 9/11 gave an opportunity to the right to take on a much more aggressive kind of stance towards not only people around the world, but people here in the United States. Did you anticipate that there would be this kind of resurgence of right feeling? Like when 9/11 happened, what were you did you anticipate that this was going to become where we're at now, where we have
I don't attribute the resurgence of the right to 9/11. I think it really began in late 1970s and
with Reagan
and it was sort of announced to the world with the election of Ronald Reagan. And it's not so much the American public opinion is not very far right now. Americans are quite moderate.
Yeah, I just mean the right has such a voice in the culture.
It's such a voice, and it's a paid for machine that is sponsoring that voice. So, no, that doesn't mean there aren't right-wing movements in the United States. There are, and that generally have to do with race, and with the usual sort of older people feeling left behind by the movement of the culture. That's very poisonous can be a very poisonous kind of thing. And I think it has a lot to do with the Tea Party. But I don't think it's 9/11. 9/11, I mean, if you look at American public opinion, Americans are not up in arms about Arabs, Muslims.
Right. There's a vocal minority that is.
I mean, they're not. They're pretty moderate.
No, I agree, but you get such a distorted view of things from a mainstream media that's dominated by those voices. Your activism seems to have emerged from the 1960s era when we had liberal presidents. How did your strategies, if they did at all, change when you became aware that the country, or at least the leadership of the country, was moving right?
That's when I turned to work in electoral politics. And the way in which I worked in electoral politics was to try to change the American electorate by expanding it to include poor people and minority people. And the way I thought we could do that is by toppling the restrictive registration system that had been put in place early in the 20th century by businessmen, conservatives in the North. So we started to work on voter registration in social agencies that provided services to the poor, that were voluntary agencies. And we weren't getting enough momentum, enough numbers out of that, partly because the agencies were timid about doing voter registration. That was part of the reason. We finally tried to change the law.
Yeah.
And we did. We actually got a new law through the Congress of the United States that was signed by Bill Clinton as soon as he took office, the National Voter Registration Act, which requires welfare, Medicaid, food stamp agencies, disability agencies, and it permits all other agencies. And it requires these agencies to offer voter registration, help with voter registration to anybody who uses the service. Trouble is that there's so much state and local opposition to actually implementing the law, that it hasn't been widely implemented, but we're still working on implementing it.
Well, and you've got enemies that want voter ID laws.
They want to revert, yeah. Also, the legislation comes up in every session of the Congress to overturn the National Voter Registration Act. So if you think it doesn't matter, the Republicans think it does.
It does. And you know, when you're thinking about electoral politics, are you thinking about on the national level? Are you talking about the state and local level being like the most vital to the people that are living there?
Maybe right now.
Yeah.
Maybe right now.
I just mean that because the left has been so, and I don't even know if it would be the left. Maybe I guess the left was so disappointed in Barack Obama as president, and he was invested with a lot of that hope from the 1960s. I mean, literally, he kind of like played on that explicitly in his campaign, and it seems like a moment where that presidency and the failure of that presidency to really answer any kind of left issues at all is a moment of great kind of disappointment in electoral politics, and yet another moment where we say,
so was Clinton, I suppose.
Yeah.
Although we all knew Clinton was a DLC person, or we should have known. But definitely, Barack Obama was a big disappointment, no question. He's very much like Clinton, and maybe Clinton in some areas is to the left of him.
Well, people were saying Obama's speech last night was very George W. Bush-ish.
It was about ISIS.
Yeah, and the particular way that he was kind of invoking presidential power and declaring war was very, very much aligned with W's kind of vision after 9/11. And so to see that is just, it feels like a very dangerous moment for the left in the sense that there's a real kind of demoralization.
I think so, yeah. But I think there's a lot of energy in some localities. Maybe New York too.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that demoralization is one way it can go, and the other way it could be this gives us the motivation for a renewed kind of political energy on the left. How do you see that happening if you do it all with the presence of the Tea Party and everything else that's going on?
Well, I think the Tea Party is a has-been party.
Yeah.
I really do.
No, I think so too.
I
It's
don't
becoming
think
more and more
that's the issue.
marginalized.
I think that the problem of deadlock in Washington, D.C. is a problem, and the weakness of Barack Obama is a problem.
Yeah.
So, and Hillary, of course, is not going to be any good. So,
right.
So let's work on state and local for a while.
Yeah, how do you feel about that kind of trap of, well, you better vote for Hillary Clinton because if not, then the right's monster will win?
Well, I may vote for Hillary Clinton. Why not? I mean, who else am I going to vote for?
Right.
But I'm not going to work for her.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll vote and then forget about it. which is what I mainly do with
Yeah.
presidential contests, although I did have some enthusiasm for the idea of a black president in
Yeah.
the United States.
I think everybody did, and is that another trap, like identity politics that emerged from the '60s? Is kind of like,
No, it's part of American history. Denying it would be ridiculous.
yeah.
Really ridiculous.
Mm.
So, I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes.
Okay, that's all right. We can wrap it up. I did want to ask you before we go about the right emerging as a kind of loud voice in this country, because there is a moment in your life where you became the target of that animus from certain characters on Fox News. Was that shocking to you? Was that kind of and I mean specifically the fact that the article from 1966 is being like, it just seems kind of bizarre to me that that's the choice, that you were the choice of the
It was bizarre, but I figured it out. I mean, I think I figured it out.
Yeah.
I think it was a story carried by David Horowitz, particularly.
Yes.
Jim Sleeper, to some extent. Who had been, David Horowitz had been Ramparts.
Yeah. He's one of those that
made the great
reactionary way. Yeah.
And I think he carried the story to the Glenn Beck people. So that's how that happened. What did amaze me, and took me a long time to come to this view, was that a lot of the crazy crowds that gathered, and I saw those, they were screaming at me.
Where?
Well, at Messiah, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It's a Christian college. And then all the emails that I got threatening to kill me. I have 68 deer hunters here with their rifles. They're ready to go.
Wow.
And then they put, I have a little house in the country. They put directions to how to get to that house.
That is terrifying.
On the internet.
Unbelievable.
And one night I woke up, there was a great crash. I thought it was a bomb. It was a tree falling on the roof. But I did think it was a bomb.
Yeah. Did you ever get bodyguards or anything like that?
No.
No?
No, I thought that would be such... I did when I went to one college. It was Messiah.
Yeah.
And I insisted that they meet me at the train because I had seen some samples of what was going to happen. That they meet me at the train with security guards. And they did. Security guards stayed with me till I left. But by and large, this place put me in a back office. And they sent guards wherever I spoke.
The CUNY Graduate Center?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They sent guards everywhere in New York when I spoke.
It just seems amazing to me, partially, in part because it seems like there's a history in the United States of the right in particular hanging the political problems of the nation on women. And I think a lot about, because I studied the GI Coffeehouse movement, Jane Fonda kind of taking on the hatred of the Vietnam War and everything that happened during that era is her fault. And it's kind of an incredible interpolation and distortion of what went on. And it feels like, to me, you're another one of those characters, in the sense that you provide a kind of body by which to project all this kind of hatred.
Well, I decided, this is what I decided when I watched them, listened to them screaming at me. Because I had wondered for a long time, why did they pick on an old lady?
Right.
And why did they make so much of the fact that she was 78 years old? And why do they keep insulting my looks?
Yeah.
I don't look so bad.
You look great.
It wasn't until that night at Messiah College that I realized they believe in witches. No, they do.
Yeah.
They really believe in witches.
Yeah.
And then I understood a Glenn Beck program I had heard one afternoon in which he began the program by talking about my call to organize the unemployed in the United States, and then shifted seamlessly to Tahrir Square in Egypt. So I'm thinking, he thinks I organized Tahrir Square? Yes.
Yeah.
Witches can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, the paranoia runs deep. It's incredible. Thanks. I know you have to go. Thank you so much for
I have
sitting
to
down
go
with
hear
me.
a job talk.
Okay.
My student asked me to please come.
It's been an honor talking to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Pleasure
it.
to talk to you, Dave.